is going to be wild for all of us, okay? So, first I got to ask, who here uses PagerDuty? Maybe use PagerDuty? A few of us? Good. Who are my on-call people? Who have actually had on-call people or are actually on-call right now? So those of you who have not raised your hands, look around, keep your hands up for me for a second. Those of you who have not raised your hands, go hug those people. Go buy them a beer, right? If you have worked in IT or operations and actually not had the opportunity to be on call, it is a different world. And these are the people around you who are keeping things running. This is why we think about operational resiliency and why operational resiliency is so important for us. AWS has done a phenomenal job. The reason we invest with them as partners and customers is that they've done this great job of how do I take that below the line resiliency, right? They've taken care of the infrastructure, the network, the other stuff. It's on you now to do that top of the line resiliency, right? How do we keep things running for our clients and doing the things that we want to do? So what PagerDuty has really done is begin to shift the way we think about the problem, right? People have thought of us for years, and our name works against us, I'll say that first, right? We're the on-call people. We're what wakes you up. That's our job. One of my dear colleagues at Castle said, you know what, PagerDuty's been waking up for 15 years, isn't it time we stopped? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I'm here to do. My name's Ethan, I'm PagerDuty's Global Field CTO, and I have the distinct pleasure of getting to work with our clients around the world on how they're accomplishing these goals. How they're beginning to rethink the way of saying, instead of, hey, make the phone ring, let's stop it from ringing. Let's make sure that our on-call people actually get a little bit of rest and do the things that they want to do. We are faced with unprecedented challenges. In the US, we love that word these days because everything in the US is unprecedented. I'm sure it's much calmer down here with Australian politics. Congratulations for that. But how we have to think about what's happening in the marketplace. I was at the Gartner conference earlier this year, towards the end of last year. And the number one thing we saw again and again was, hey, this idea of come to me with your 3% and your 5% savings, we're out, right? We're done with that. That squeezing these last little bit of margins out, it's not getting us there. We have to rethink. We have to retool. We have to retrain. One of my clients in the UK came to us and said, you know what? COVID changed everything, right? We can't hire the way we used to. We can't staff the way we used to. We can't move the way we used to. Help us run our business from the pub. And I thought about it for a second, and you almost think, well, it's kind of patently ridiculous, right? But hey, I work my 9-10 hour shift, head down to my local, want to catch up on the footy scores, get my first, pint put in front of me. I prefer Victoria bitters, sorry, Melbourne bitters, whatever gets you through the day. And before I take that first sip, my phone goes off, right? How do I begin to rethink the thing that I do? So how do I begin to train and build a staff around it that's going to make sure that I can think about how do I leverage the power of these capabilities to change the way I do it? How do I drive down costs across the board? How do I take all of these things that are coming from AI and automation, and not just for the sake of them, right? Every single vendor you're going to hear from here is going to talk about AI and automation. Everyone. Ask them how many are talking about people. Right? This isn't about eliminating jobs. This is about taking people and making them more valuable, accelerating them, taking those new SREs and making them to where in a few weeks they can be acting as if they've been there for months with the power of the things that are there. And the last thing is mitigating operational risk. I cannot tell you what a difference this makes. If you actually really want to them in and say, how do I improve the overall capability of what we're doing? Risk. Whenever you're going around inside your organization, you can't find money, there's a chief compliance officer or a chief risk officer who has money. Give them your case. Explain to them. Help them understand how things are slow or broke or being able to introduce new security or risks. How is that actually going to change the footprint of what you want to do? So these are the lenses that we see in the challenges that we're driving around that. And obviously there's always the old school, how much does downtime cost? A lot of things around that. And I want you to really begin to spell this out. I was working with a big tool distribution company in the US. And one of their major problems was they'd have different parts of their warehouse things go down. Now from the IT perspective, it's like, we're not getting signals for a little bit, know what's going on. Those guys can take a break, drink a little coffee. They may have to work an extra hour that day or whatever. So what? Well, guess what? You know how much union overtime is for freight workers and dock workers? Turns out to be a lot. And oh, by the way, truckers are restricted on how many hours they can drive that day. So if the trucks can't flow, product can't get there, people are in trouble. So what they thought was just pay, maybe we lose 50 grand or something out of it. They multiply those costs out of a warehouse. It was something like $1 to $3 million an hour that was popping out of it. So we tend to think about, of course, the big financial service institutions and these others around that. Of course, when Amazon or Alibaba go down, those numbers are monstrous. But what does it mean to you? How many times have you gone somewhere on a website, whether it's booking travel or wanting to buy a flashlight, whatever else around that? Are you going to spend 30, 45 minutes trying to make something work? Of course not. Are you going to spend 3 minutes making something work? No. Are you my wife and not making 15 seconds work? No, right? You're going to move on to the next thing because there are too many options available to you today. And what does that reputational risk mean? If I couldn't get to your website that day, am I going to come back? Not if I found an option that's out there. So when we think about how things are beginning to change around us, in particular around Gen AI, everybody tired of Gen AI yet? I am, right? But there's some really wild stuff that's happening. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about it. Because I think so much of the Gen AI hype has been, again, that, you can replace people. We're tired of it, right? I was talking to a second line manager in the US, and I came in, and we had always had great conversations. Walk in one day, and the guy's just sitting there, his head's down, and he said, so what's going on? And he said, well, the board just sent out a note to all the second line managers in the organization, and we have to come up with the number of people we're going to fire because of Gen AI. Incredibly short-sighted. Incredibly stupid. Because Gen AI actually can begin to do that. I think I'm saying accelerating our people. How do we get more value from them? How do you take the most junior members of your team and actually make them more capable of the things they're doing? Anybody got a little tech debt? Or tech wealth? Sorry, not tech debt, tech wealth. We got a little tech wealth hanging out there somewhere, right? Wouldn't we like to be able to go get that? How do we articulate the value of that? This is where we're going to take, is that Gen AI is going to help us now begin to do that shift of what we're doing around toil, that break fix work, the kinds of things we're chasing things around and beginning to think about new ways to harness that and create new capabilities from it. But guess what? Anybody tried to debug a little Gen AI code lately? I've seen people actually have operations to have Gen AI spit out new footprints of stuff. Why the heck is there an Apache Kafka sitting on my queue out there that was never there before? Why did Gen AI think that was a good idea, right? We're going to introduce more complexity, more risk, and more new details around things. So Gen AI is going to be that double-edged sword. And it's going to be this thing that's going to drive this interruptions in our work and our unplanned work. There's a fantastic book out there I encourage you to look at called Making Work Visible. And this is the thing, is that when these things disappear on us, right, where do our hours in our day go? And it really began to talk about this. There was $1 trillion wasted in the global economy on unplanned work. How much is it costing you on a day-to-day basis? How much do you, when you get in the flow of something, yep, my phone goes off. Oh, this thing broke. Oh, new request came in for XYZ, right? We see that all the time. How do we begin to change that and rethink it? Well, what we really want to do is say, all right, how do I begin to take advantage of all those things that are coming in around that? So I've got a ton of data that's happening in real time out in the environment. And when we think about automation, automation tends to come in a couple of flavors, right? Generally it is, hey, Bobby knows to hit the button when he sees these three things, or at 3 p.m. on Thursdays, kick off the backups, whatever it is, right? Event-driven automation says, look what's happening in the environment right now, and begin to respond to that as quickly as possible. And leverage AI in a way that now says, how can I accelerate people? How can I make people more valuable? This is the lens that we want to drive because we have to transform operations. We cannot continue to drive the way that we were doing 10 years ago and still expect to get the exact same results. So when we've been thinking about this, right, running my business from the pub, what does that look like? Well, I've got all of these massive investments that I have in DevSecOps, in CI/CD, in my master data management strategy, in my API management strategy, all of these different places that are telling me about what's going on in the environment in real time, and I want to begin to respond to them as quickly as possible. So I want to move at machine speed to take all of those, potentially thousands, tens of thousands, millions of events that are coming in, dedupe them, suppress them, begin to move. Now, if I just start handing you that raw hundreds of thousands and say, hey, AJ, have at it, she's going to get drowned right away. So I need automation, but I need contextual-based automation from those events to begin to help me understand how I'm going to drive that overall incident response and what I want to do. I want to bring customer service capabilities into it because customers are still telling about problems, and I want to close that last line of defense with my clients to say, hey, wherever a problem, don't call us, don't call you. So how do we do this? Well, it turns out that we've been actually sitting on a treasure trove of machine learning and AI data for a very, very long time. This is not new to PagerDuty. We have got petabytes and billions of data points around that we've taken in processing events for the past 8 years, that we have trained our machine learning models on so that we can do things like auto-pausing and transient alerts. Hey, don't tell me about a link flap or a port flap, because I can't do anything about it anyway. Help me move on very quickly to begin to get around that. Again, accelerating people. Let you focus on the things that you most care about in order to have the best outcomes. And now leveraging generative AI to close those gaps around that. How can I do things such as, hey, automatically create a new status update for me. Help me generate a new runbook for this problem that I found in MySQL that I couldn't find the longest running process. These kinds of things. So building on top of that history of capability of what we've had is really talking about starting that integration. More than 750 integrations out of the box. Make it very simple to bring those things together around that as quickly as possible. I have a client in the US that they were trying to do these capabilities with ServiceNow, for example. Great tool, but not a great real-time tool. They had to wait 4 months just to get a basic integration into monitoring. They got so tired of waiting, a guy actually bought PagerDuty, did it in 10 minutes, and got started that way. So being able then to create these loops on how we move all the way from very simple, that integration, taking it, creating that context, how do we learn from that? And how do we drive from it? And we've seen this success again and again and again. So more than 65% of the Fortune 100, we'll show you the black around this, we're used in lots of different places, lots of different industries. Because we have more than 18,000 customers worldwide, there's a pretty good chance that if we've seen your problem before somewhere else. But the thing I want you to take away more than anything else, because of course everybody's got their favorite IDC statistics, we don't have much money to save. But the thing I love most, 9 weeks to pay back. Show me anything else as an enterprise grade solution that's going to come in and help you and get your money back in 9 weeks. That's what we're bringing to the table. So I wanted to introduce a couple of our very special guests today that are going to be joining us. My friends, David Nduku from IAG and Niall McCarthy. Come on up, fellas. So thanks so much for you guys taking a chance to be with us here today. I wanted to, we've had a chance to visit a little bit, but if you could kind of tell the folks a little bit about your companies, yourselves, so they get an introduction.
My name is David Nduku. I'm the head of platform engineering for the Insurance Australia Group, IAG. And for a lot of us who are based in Australia, you probably know that IAG is the largest general insurance business in the country. So whether you have home, boat, caravan, to be insured, it's the place to go. So good to be here, and I'm going to be sharing a few of some of the lessons learned and experiences on our journey towards incident response and how we lift up our capability in the enterprise.
Thanks, Dave.
Hi, I'm Niall McCarthy. I head up a dedicated incident response and reliability function within Afterpay. Afterpay is primarily a buy now pay later service provider for merchants across Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, and the UK.
Good. Now I know who to call when my wife's buying stuff down here.
Sure.
So talk to me a little bit now about what drove your decision to deploy PagerDuty?
Sure. Fundamentally around scalable complexity. As the application offering grows and the number of microservices in production, that count goes up. The number of different things that you might want to be able to get a hold of someone for in an emergent context changes. There's a certain amount of complexity that an increasing count of microservices and scenarios introduces. So you need a tool that's going to be able to have more than one way to get a hold of people, depending on the scenario.
Fantastic. Dave, what about you?
Look, we're to be frank, we're just at the sort of infancy. There's a journey with adoption of PagerDuty. And so one of the things I've been doing over the last sort of few months with my team is look at the marketplace and based on a whole bunch of requirements and try to assess what tool is best for what we're looking to do. And I think we're at a point where we're very reasonably convinced that PagerDuty is the way to go, and we're just at the point where we're embarking on that sort of next bit. But the results, particularly from some initial R&D we've conducted, looks very, very promising. and I see a very bright future ahead of of the team, especially with PGIDT coming on board. Yeah.
So one of the things we know is that, look, everybody wants to go faster and save money, right? So we always start with, we think about MTTR and things like that. But talk to me a little bit about some of the other metrics, right? Because I think, there's always a challenge in our business of that, if everybody in this room does their job dead solid perfect, we don't exist, right? So how do we show that, the capability? What are the metrics we use to prove that out?
Well, I think it's varied, because different stakeholders would, typically want, to have a vested interest in some, metrics, that aligns to, their business capabilities, and also ensuring, that they remain, up and running. So typically, uptime, I have an application running, tier 1, tier 2, 0 applications that they want to know, what percentage of the time am I up, right? So what's the error rate, on the apps that I run, what's the throughput, and so on and so forth. And if there's an incident on the platform, what's the mean time for me to recover, So there are obviously very important, metrics, that border around, the application stack, but also there are business-specific metrics, for example, service level, definitions across board, whether it's, service level indicators, objectives, or agreements. So those SLAs have to be, SLI indicators have to also be baked, within, the data points, that we report across those application stacks. So it's all varied, but ultimately, it's all about ensuring that your system is up, almost,
right.
All of the time. Yeah.
So really that the leading and lagging indicators, right? So being able to keep track of how we move forward, but also look backward. What about for you, Niall? Is that?
Yeah, well, I'm very mindful that some of my ideas are a bit radical. One of the first things I don't like doing is putting the M in front of TTR, mainly because severity matters. So mean time to restore, if I'm comparing two severity 1 incidents, is meaningful. But mean time to restore, if I've got a Sev 4 and a Sev 1 in front of me, that's a fun piece of trivia to someone who cares. But in a practical sense, I'm not actually deriving insight from that. So time to restore in the context of severity matters. Also, time to remediate. Just because you've stopped the problem does not necessarily mean you've fully resolved an incident. There are some after restoration activities that you may owe, depending on, like you said, the service level and how your customers expect. Your question on measurement more generally, if you don't mind me kind of being assertive a little bit here, would be, we talk about uptime, and I think uptime is important, but contextual and weighted uptime is much more important. So if I have to do 10 minutes of downtime, I'd like to have that maybe at 4:10 in the morning. But 10 minutes of downtime at 6 p.m. on Thursday, wildly problematic for retailers. So percentage availability can be for tourists a lot of the time, and I think contextualized and weighted uptime, it's a better reflection of how your customers are using your services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked for MSPs in the past, and of course, anytime there was those kind of things, oh yeah, that went in our planned outage bucket, right? So it doesn't count against me. So,
unplanned
and I
outage.
think, I think exactly that, what you're talking about, the metrics and the way we think about that matters, right? Not all things are equal around it. So to continue your heretical stance, which I have loved many of them, in the past you've talked about really breaking down the reductive barriers in the system. Talk to us a little bit about that and what that means.
Yeah, right, okay. Favorite hobby horse of mine. One of the terms that we work very hard to get rid of is this kind of idea of the business and engineering. We are the business. And I think that needs to be made psychologically safe. In the context of incidents are fantastic opportunities to build context beyond just engineering. So if something's wrong with, say, customer sign-up, if you have a part of your organization that's preoccupied with acquiring customers, or messaging or marketing to customers, or supporting customers, then I argue this incident is relevant to those people and not just to the hard-working engineering manager and team whose microservices have red beside them at the moment. Incidents aren't just an engineering concern. And that's why I'm a big fan of putting non-engineering teams on PagerDuty rosters.
And that's a very valid point. Particularly, when it comes to the definition of service level, metrics. What are they? It's one of the errors I see, across, a lot of organizations, is putting engineers in front of defining what those are. Right, what the service level, indicators, objectives and agreements will have to be co-defined, sitting side by side the business, right? Because they understand the application and the application context, who their stakeholders are, and they have to help work alongside the engineering team to actually co-create and shape that up, before we actually then codify those into the pipelines, that will then surface up these metrics. So it's a very careful balancing act. But again, I think with the right level of communication and putting the right stakeholders, into a single room, you're able to define very much closely, because these things they keep moving. It's a moving target, right?
Yeah.
If you have an SLA, that was relevant yesterday, and then today business context changes, and then you have to refine that. So you keep shifting the dial,
right,
over time. But having to bring those communities together is so key in getting the right definition.
And I think that's super critical, right? Because we tend to love to wrap our arms around MTTR, right? Because we can own it, it's ours, it's our little huggy baby, and we can talk to the world about it. But guess what? It doesn't matter to the business, right? It's not necessarily a meaningful metric.
We're looking to find a functional way to measure correctness. And one of the interesting things that's happened, certainly a colleague of mine has fond of saying that production is a perpetual state of degradation. And they're right. More generally, I couldn't possibly speak for my own service, certainly not while my phone is over there. But the idea of measuring correctness is a really, really nice unifying thing, because apart from the fact that I think if you're interested in customers, you should be interested in what their pain points are. Later on, I might need to go back to a stakeholder and ask for some money.
Yeah.
And it is so much more powerful to be able to say, hey, remember that thing on Tuesday? And because the stakeholder be able to have had that experience and say, right, that was the worst. And you're like, yes, investment, please.
Yep.
There's a bit more to it, but having a shared experience really makes it much easier to invoke that story later and say, this is why I'd like to take 4 of David's team for 2 sprints and work on this.
Yeah, one of my favorite tricks when I was having, there was no money available, right?
Sure.
And your stuff didn't matter, and you guys don't really have any problems anyway. And I go to guys and say, well, look, not that this is going to happen, Niall.
Sure.
But let's say next Thursday between 2 and 4, your service wasn't available. Is that a problem?
We don't even joke about that. To be clear, that's a. You obviously haven't been on call in a while. You don't even joke about that.
So really just being able to ground people around that, because again, that absence of problems tends to be the way the business views us and the way we think about it. So, similarly, it is. How do you think about this kind of scalability of on-call and things around large organizations? How are you designing for that? How do you account for that?
Well, again, this is where taking the business on the journey really matters. IAG is a very big business, and what that means is that introducing change can have ramifying implications. So we've got to be really careful in terms of how we introduce change, how we manage the change, the risk around the change, and also ensuring that we're managing that also and all the expectations that come with it. So having those very early conversations, talking to the business, helping them to understand the context of the change. Why are we making this change? What's going to be the impact? What are the dependencies, right? And that needs to be really clearly, agreed upon, and get all the stakeholders to sign off, on that. But also, one thing IAG does really well is we've got a very robust, sort of frameworks, that help us shift change, all through the pipeline. Whether engagement with cybersecurity, engagement with architecture, engagement even with project governance, just to ensure that we're asking the right questions, at the right level of detail as we push the change, all through. But also comes the need for us to experiment. I love engineering. I'm an engineer at heart, but I'm always very mindful of big bang changes and the impact they will cause in very large organizations as ours. So that means we got to structure the change in such a way that we gradually evolve. So there's a bit of learning and testing and experimentation that needs to happen, and also showcasing the benefits to the business, giving them the opportunity to also challenge and also provide input, and then we'll refine the process, and then we'll come to a level where we then gradually scale out. So all of this is a combination of both the engineering mindset, but also the people element of it needs to come really nicely to deliver the right change outcomes.
Yeah, so Niall, David talks a lot about context.
Sure.
You talk about the context gap. Tell us a little bit about that and what you think is happening there.
Sure. Something that I'm fond of saying is that microservices are the worst. But what I mean by that is that I can only speak for the footprint that we're responsible for, but it's very rare for an individual customer to use a single microservice in isolation. And I think that's a really, really good operating principle. So you're talking about scale and the context gap, and where those two things come together. One is microservices are typically used in sets. So let's make the scalable thing that we measure first and foremost the collection that in totality represents a particular user story, like say user sign up. So rather than saying XYZ API green is off, which I'm sorry to hear about, that's much more meaningful if it's like, oh, customers can't sign in.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
stakeholders say, next time say that, friend.
That's correct.
So we've learned over time that there's maybe 24, maybe 30 conversations that are sort of umbrella conversations under which all of these microservices should live. And what we've had some success with is structuring alerting and then paging based on those supersets, those capabilities, rather than individual microservices. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that that context means that you've got a shared language for someone other than engineering, or indeed sometimes just someone from another engineering team who's working on a completely different domain.
Yeah.
So rather than naming a component, saying like, hey, this is retailer facing, this is consumer facing, this is both.
Yeah.
This is a scheduled job that's been delayed. All of the other details matter too, but having that shared portable context, if nothing else, it means that no one has to rewrite your status updates for a different group of people.
That's so crucial because look, and we're talking about PagerDuty and the benefits of scale that PagerDuty brings on, to the business. And I tell you, businesses without the right context, right, embedded, in the ecosystem. For example, your CMDB has to be up to date with the right grain, of data to actually explain, the business context, the interrelationships between them. Once those things are clearly defined, then it makes it easy, a lot easier for you to then hook up something like PagerDuty, who then lens from all of that context and begin to drive the right level of automation. Otherwise, it's going to struggle.
Yeah.
When you report incidents and there are question marks all over the place, then you haven't solved much of a problem, so to say, because you're not able to tie the end. So you got to have a consistent way of telling a lineage story. All right. So the system got broken at one point, and we know exactly why. I will know what the dependencies are, or the implications of that system remaining down over a period of time. So that level of robustness needs to be embedded into the business. So
to jump in, sorry, because we're vibing. We're having a moment.
It's good.
I love it. Let's keep going.
We have a minute and a moment left. So.
Well, I'll be super concise. The capstone on that is also to arrive at some sort of shared definition of harm.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things we're fond of saying is like everything's a sev one to somebody.
Yeah. Right.
That doesn't scale at all. Particularly if on occasion you're waking someone up.
Right.
And having some sort of fidelity and trust there to be like, we can all agree this is a 1. We can all agree this is a 2.
That's right.
And not fall back on
Absolutely.
vibes.
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate what y'all have shared around and hopefully the big takeaway for you is this idea of closing that context gap. How does the business understand what you do? How do you articulate your value to the business?
Yeah.
How do you share the same values across the business? How do you make sure that your operations are aligning against the business value so that you're able to successfully push that every day? And hopefully this is what PagerDuty has been enabling some of that for you. Obviously your background, the skills and things you have. Cannot thank you all enough for sharing things with us today. Want to close out, come visit the PagerDuty booth. Hopefully we're going to get our friends over there for a little bit to answer any questions you might have. And like I said, I want to close out, well, I think that focusing on this Gen AI capability, not as replacing us, but helping us, and what does that look like? So ladies and gentlemen, I introduce PagerDuty Copilot. Thanks so much. We're going to be talking with you soon.
Thank you.